Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami. We start with India and the ridiculous allegations it is hurling on Pakistan, as India seems to fail miserably in controlling the situation at home in the wake of COVID-19 outbreak and reaction against its Hindutva-driven policies. It has once again chosen its tradition to accuse Pakistan for its failures. Pakistan's Foreign Office has categorically rejected Indian allegations of infiltration attempts. In a statement, Pakistan's Foreign Office said that these accusations are to divert global attention of India's terrorism in occupied Kashmir, as well as a pretext for a false flag operation. The statement made it very clear that Pakistan has the will, capacity, and preparedness to thwart any Indian misadventure. And to talk more about this, we are joined today by Mr. Asif Durrani, former ambassador from Islamabad, and Major General retired Ijaz Awan. Thank you, both of you, for your time at Newswire. I'll start the discussion with you, General Awan. Pakistan's Foreign Office has rejected the Indian allegations that Pakistan is trying to infiltrate the LOC. Why would Pakistan even try to do this sort of a thing? Doesn't this accusation seem to be ridiculous?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a very ridiculous and absurd allegation that India is trying to blame Pakistan for any kind of infiltration. It's in fact the old narrative which they are trying to carry forward for three reasons. There is a lot of diplomatic pressure coming on India from three sides. One, the UN Secretary General had made a request to the worldwide powers that all hostilities across the globe must cease so that the countries can concentrate for their fight against COVID-19. The Secretary General had also emphasized that India must ease restrictions in the Indian occupied Kashmir and allow access of the medical facilities to the people of Kashmir. So this is one pressure. Second, you have already mentioned in your intro that within India, there is a lot of diplomatic pressure and a public pressure which is coming onto the government for their Hindutva-driven policies and for fight against COVID-19 and the country and the people, the miseries that the people are going through and they are facing. And the third pressure has now recently come that India may have had the whiff of it earlier. The congressional report, commission report, the US Commission report for atrocities being perpetrated by India or unjust treatment of minorities in India. Now, because of this pressure, Indian government is trying to divert the attention of the international media, the domestic audience, and to ward off the diplomatic pressure. They are trying to hurl accusations against Pakistan. These are baseless, these are absurd, and look at their naive approach when they try to say that Pakistan is trying to send COVID-19 infection into India. Now, Pakistan, by the grace of Almighty Allah, is the least affected countries in the world today. And the most affected are the most richer and the most advanced nations. So putting an accusation of COVID-19 spread on a neighboring country is again as laughable, as absurd as anything else can be.
Exactly. And take this very point to Mr. Durrani. Do you consider this particular accusation as just being mentioned by General Awan as well, that this is laughable and ridiculous, and how a country could think, no matter whether it is Pakistan or any other country in the world, of spreading the virus by forcefully trying to infiltrate through the border?
Well, I think you have said it, and General Awan has said, does not in fact stand any scrutiny by any sane person who to talk of the scientific evidence. Indians have not given any evidence for that. And it's all an alibi. They want to just cover up their own follies, their own atrocities, which they have been perpetrating in India against the minorities, particularly the Muslims.
Okay, Mr.
want to
Durrani, as
cover
you
up the
have also
lockdown.
said, and Jawan is of the view that India is trying to divert the global attention. That is exactly the point which the Foreign Office statement also reiterates once again, that India is trying to divert the global attention. As we know, that its terrorist activities and atrocities are unabatedly going on in Indian-occupied Kashmir over the last over 260 days since the autonomy of the region has been snatched since 5th of August. But do you think these sort of attempts or the mischievous sort of tactics can help India in a true sense to divert the global attention from what it actually is doing, not in only occupied Kashmir, but also within its own territory as well?
Certainly not, because now India has been at the receiving end ever since they resorted to lockdown against the Indian-occupied Kashmir, against the Kashmiri people. 9 million people are almost in a concentration camp. And the international media, in fact, took on Indian atrocities. In fact, the involvement of their state in terrorist activities against the innocent people. Similarly, after their announcement of Citizen Act in the country, this has brought the Muslims almost to the receiving end. They are being discriminated.
Okay, General Awan, when we talk about the Foreign Office statement, there is another very important thing which is mentioned in that statement. The statement goes on to say that these sort of accusations are a pretext for another false flag operation from India. And that is exactly which has been a concern which has been raised by Pakistan's Prime Minister ever since the snatching of autonomy of Kashmir back in August last year. Now, when we talk about this false flag operation, we saw that India made a misadventure in the form of the Balakot strike, and then they were responded befittingly to by the Pakistan Air Force. Don't you think India has learned any lesson out of it?
Well, I don't think India has learned any lesson, and there is no doubt that there is a probability that India may attempt yet another false flag operation to blame Pakistan for the situation as it spins out of control in Kashmir, because they have killed about 10 innocent people in Kashmir in the last 24 hours. So they are continuously suppressing the people. They are keeping them in a concentration camp, as is believed, and it's an open-air prison, entire Indian occupied Kashmir. Now, India is trying to address, as I see it, the domestic audience, and they are trying to convey to their own right-wing voters and Hindu majority that this is what's happening in Kashmir, and this is how Pakistan is trying to interfere in the internal affairs of Kashmir, because they are also seeing a possibility. Now, there is a window of opportunity which they wish to exploit, because the world is busy to fight against COVID-19, and particularly the permanent 5 countries are hardest hit. America is under a lot of pressure because of COVID-19. So is France, France, UK, and other countries. So because of this diversion of attention and internal commitment of the Western governments to fight COVID-19, India wishes to gain miles in their fight against the minorities in Kashmir in particular. Because of this, they would try to create a situation where whenever the attention of the international community is drawn towards India, or some sort of pressure is created on India, diplomatic pressure, so they have a reason to sell a story. They will build a story to sell it to the international community. More than that, it is of no significance.
Okay, by that particular time, but there has to be someone looking into this matter, as you have just mentioned that the United Nations also called for a universal ceasefire, particularly in order to combat the COVID-19 pandemic that has engulfed and taken the grip all around the world. Now, rather than focusing on what exactly should be done at home within its own territory, India is trying to divert the attention, but for how long? Obviously, this pandemic has to end somewhere, and the world will be run on the same lines as it was being run before the arrival of the pandemic. So would India be able to justify the window of opportunity that it is trying to take advantage of?
Well, look, there is an unfortunate reality that the desired diplomatic pressure or these atrocities are not being looked at the way they should have been. Now, because of this latest report of the US Commission on International Religious Tolerance, that desired pressure is still not coming on India and is not likely to come on India as much because the strategic considerations of Indo-US relations would dominate and they would prevail. Their diplomatic atrocities against the minorities or the atrocities against the minorities within India, because Indo-China relation and Indo-US relation and this equation of the big powers is going to dominate the relations and the pressure that is going to come on India, which unfortunately I think it overweighs in favor of the strategic considerations rather than what's happening to minorities in India.
Okay, Mr. Ni, after the Indian pilot was captured and was then later returned by Pakistan as a goodwill gesture to India, but on the other side of the border, it was construed as the weakness of Pakistan. But the world recognized Pakistan's true spirit and the efforts for bringing peace in the region. How do you analyze the diplomacy Pakistan had at that particular time, and why do you think India shies away all the time when Pakistan extends the invitation to come onto the negotiating table?
Well, I think India has been on the defensive and made by Pakistan because right from return of the pilot onwards, and then whatever actions India has been taking and the international media, which has actually has been harsh, critical on India. Otherwise, India had always took cover being the largest democracy. But now this largest democracy is actually the largest persecution camp for the Muslims. So in this way, gradually the pressure has been building on India. Yeah? And it's going to grow because now we have seen that Gulf states have also expressed their concern. It has been expressed in Oman, in UAE, and as well as by the Saudis. Iran has already expressed the concern. So I think, and then now the Gulf states have also, in fact, there's a veiled warning that in this manner, if you want to persecute Muslims and you want to defame Islam, then I think then they'll have to reconsider their options vis-a-vis India. However, at the governmental level, this has not come yet. It has yet to come. But it is also important to see that India is the largest economy in the region, and its economic weight actually dictates many things. Therefore, it can get away with it, like U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Its report recommends that India should be declared as country of the primary concern with regard to religious tolerance. But at the same time, one of the members has written a dissenting note which says that India is a strategic partner. So it will go on, and I think we have succeeded in maintaining pressure on India.
Mr. Durrani, you're of that Pakistan has been successful in maintaining a good pressure on India. Thank you very much for joining at Newswire. Mr. Asif Durrani, former ambassador, joined us from Islamabad. We really appreciate your time at Newswire. And General Awan, one last question. The Foreign Office has termed Indian Defense Minister's statement that we dominate the enemy as provocative. How do you analyze this statement, particularly after the last episode they had once they tried their misadventure in Balakot?
Well, Indian Defense Minister has got nothing else to say. They have to raise the morale of their own army and they have to raise the morale of their own nation. So he'll make a statement which may be entirely baseless. We understand, as I understand as a soldier, and the world understands that there are latest reports on the Indian war machine. Their air force, their tank, their larger armor concentration, and the armor buildup is outdated, and they are not at all at par with the latest equipment that Pakistan possesses. And that too, we operate on interior lines, and Pakistan is well in a position to ward off any threat from India, and we have proven it in the Balakot violation that we recently had. But just to raise the morale of their own people, the Indian Defense Minister has made this statement. One sentence I would also like to add that because of the forthcoming US elections, there is a considerable vote bank of Indians which President Trump would like to bag close to November. So because of this, till November, I don't think the US policies or the UN policies are going to put much pressure on India. And therefore, unfortunately, the status quo would prevail and people of Kashmir would keep facing the atrocities unless the Muslim world builds a pressure and
unless Muslim world builds pressure on India to rectify its behavior towards Kashmiris, to Muslims inside Pakistan, and towards Pakistan as well. And Mr. Major General Ijaz Awan, you were of the view that an interesting fact to these provocative statements is also associated because there is upcoming election in the US and there is a huge vote bank of Indians for President Trump. And this is basically happening because of that reason as well. And you're of the view that India doesn't dominate Pakistan at all, and Pakistan is fully prepared to thwart any sort of misadventure by India. Thank you for being with us. Major General retired Ijaz Awan, analyst, joined us from Rawalpindi. With this, we come to the end of the first segment of the show. In the second, we will discuss Iran's warning to the US of a powerful response in case of any provocative move. For that, stay tuned. I will be back in a bit. Welcome back to Newswire. I am Jawad Tehami. Tensions in the Persian Gulf have recently escalated after US President Donald Trump threatened that US Navy ships would shoot Iranian gunboats that get too close. A US Navy statement earlier had alleged that 11 boats of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had closed in on the US naval vessels in dangerous and harassing approaches. These accusations earned a very strong reaction from Iran, which dismissed these accusations, terming them a Hollywood tale. Iranian armed forces have warned that any provocative move by the US will be met with a powerful response. Tehran says the presence of the US and its allies in West Asia, especially the Persian Gulf, has been the source of insecurity for regional countries. The question arises that is the world in a position to pay the price for any direct confrontation between the US and Iran, as it already grapples with the menace of COVID-19 pandemic? And to understand what's happening in the Persian Gulf and where is this escalation headed, we are joined by Mr. Khoshcheshm, analyst from Tehran, and Mr. Szamuely, Middle East expert from Budapest. Thank you very much for your time, both of you gentlemen. I'll begin with you, Mr. Khoshcheshm. As we have seen, there has been a rapid rise of tensions between the US and Iran, especially since the US unilaterally withdrew from the nuclear deal. Has this series of explosive episodes between both of these countries brought both of these countries to the brink of war?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, if you mean accidental or incidental war, yes, any kind of misfire in the Persian Gulf once again could end up in war. But I do not believe that either side has planned for war. Everything started with the Pentagon budget bill back in 2017 when they mentioned one of their strategic goals as facilitated action and missions in the Persian Gulf. Ever since then, they have been rising tensions on and off, and I believe based on miscalculations and wrong assessment because of the threshold of Iranian tolerance, actually. Because we've seen that in the case of the Global Hawk that violated Iranian airspace, and Iranians never hesitated to shoot it down. Also, in the case of the assassination of General Soleimani, we saw how Iran launched missile strikes on the U.S. airbase at Ain al-Assad, southwestern Iraq. And all this, I believe, were carried out by the United States, actually based on this wrong assessment that Iranians would tolerate. and Iranians showed that it's wrong, that their threshold of tolerance differs. Now, this new round of tension a couple of weeks ago, as you just mentioned, started with the U.S. Navy. They've been, they've started actually some new tactics in the Persian Gulf. They've gone on the offensive. They've been bothering Iranian vessels, civilians, and military in the northern parts near the Farsi island of Iran that happens to be in Iranian territorial waters. They were close to the international waters when they bothered the Iranian vessel, and the Iranian vessels have been calling for IRGC help, and they rescued them, actually. This shows that the U.S. is at it once again. There could be, of course, 3 tactical objectives for the U.S. president to do that, but all these tactical objectives are aligned with, in line with the main strategic goal of the United States, that is starting scenes in the Persian Gulf. Then they call for media hype by the mainstream media in the West in order to represent the IRGC as the adventurous and irresponsible side, to blame the IRGC in order to rally international and regional support for the U.S., stronger U.S. policing role in the region, in the hope that they could undermine IRGC control over the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf first, then stretch their build-up towards north, towards Iranian waters. And if they, at a later stage, if they could, they would like to protrude and force themselves into the power equation and management equation, controlling power of the waterway, in order to partner with the IRGC in the end, to make them inefficient in the region and facilitate their missions and whatever they want to do in the region. Let's remember that despite all the allegations made by the United States that Persian Gulf is no more used because the U.S. is now producing sufficient oil, we do know that Persian Gulf is even more important than before, because anyone who controls the Persian Gulf, it would control the global oil lifeline and the economies that are dependent
Mr.
on this.
Khoshcheshm, this is really an interesting fact that you've just mentioned, that U.S. is producing oil in huge quantity, and Persian Gulf has become even more important for it. We'll come back to the similar sort of incidents which have happened during Barack Obama's government as well, and we'll discuss that one in detail. For now, Mr. Szamuely, the statement which has been given by Tehran about these accusations of the U.S. hurled against its naval forces in the Persian Gulf, the statement goes on to say that the U.S. precarious presence and its establishment of military bases in the region have been the root causes of insecurity, illegal moves, and the acts of mischief. Now, please share with us, what does international law say about any country threatening or breaching the territorial waters of a certain other country? What are the remedies in international law?
Well, of course, if you are breaching the territorial waters of any country, then you are in violation of international law. In terms of remedies, that's up to the countries as to what they want to do. You can fire warning shots, you can board hostile vessels, and so on. Iran really has good grounds for fearing the United States. It has United States military bases on either side, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, not to mention the military bases throughout the Persian Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and so on. And of course, there is a substantial U.S. naval presence in the Gulf and in the Mediterranean. So Iran has legitimate grounds for fearing the United States. Moreover, given the hostility of the Trump administration and given the hostile acts that the Trump administration has already perpetrated against Iran, including the assassination of General Soleimani, there is every reason for Iran to fear some kind of a military confrontation, particularly as this is an election year and Donald Trump will have a very tough re-election fight on his hands. So some kind of a diversion in the Persian Gulf could well be something that he'd be interested in. Particularly, again, given the world oil prices, which have gone sunk through the floor, any kind of a military confrontation with Iran cannot but help boost oil prices. And this is something that Trump would obviously be very interested in, because he staked a lot on the U.S. shale oil industry, and he staked a lot on the U.S. now being the greatest oil producer in the world. So if oil prices are down at zero, then a lot of the shale oil industry would just simply be wiped out. So Trump would have every incentive to trigger some kind of a confrontation. I'm not saying it's necessarily a full-scale war. Nobody wants a full-scale war, but some sort of a confrontation that would help boost oil prices. So it is understandable that Iran's political and military leadership is viewing U.S. actions with some concern.
So, Mr. Szamuely, on one side, we see that U.S. is trying hard to achieve peace with the Taliban in Afghanistan. It has already signed the historic peace deal in Doha, and it is trying to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. But on the other side, as you have just mentioned, that it is looking for a confrontation with Iran. What sort of a contradiction this one is?
Well, it is a contradiction. First of all, Trump has been extremely hostile toward Iran from even before he became president. I mean, during his 2016 election campaign, he promised that he would withdraw from the JCPOA. He was as good as his word. So there's been nothing but hostility toward Iran emanating from the Trump administration. What the reasons are for that, one can obviously speculate in terms of his financial supporters, the funders of his election campaign. But that's something that's a given, and that isn't going to end. As for Afghanistan, yes, he signed an agreement to withdraw the troops, but that hasn't happened yet, and we don't really know whether it will happen. Trump has made many promises that he's going to withdraw from the Middle East, he's going to withdraw from Afghanistan, Syria, whatever, with the $7 trillion that the U.S. has wasted. He wants to invest it in infrastructure in the United States. None of that has materialized. So
none of that has materialized. I'll take that point of Trump's wish of raising the oil prices, since oil is being produced in the U.S. in huge quantity. Mr. Khoshcheshm, you also alluded to that particular fact, that it is because the oil markets, which have slumped all of a sudden, particularly when we talk about the U.S. oil markets. But keeping in view the situation in the U.S., that it is basically the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic. The economy is already on the decline, and there have been over many millions of people who have applied for the jobless filings. Keeping that in view, do you think just to raise the prices of oil and to give a shoulder to the oil market in the U.S., U.S. president would really think of a direct confrontation with Iran? Is that the remedy or the solution, according to him?
I do agree, of course, with my colleague, but I mean, he mentioned two of the three tactical level objectives that I was just talking about. As I said, he's not looking for war. He's playing somewhere between security and provocation. Based on the assessment, the Pentagon assessment, that Tehran would not take action, that threshold of tolerance of Iran stays at specific levels, and Iran would not start war. This is working on that basis in pursuit of one strategic goal that I just mentioned, that's a wider presence in controlling or partnering in the control of the Persian Gulf as a strategic level objective, and three tactical level objectives of first, stimulating oil market prices in order to make shale oil and gas production again lucrative, to make the United States a supplier again after, anything down $40-50 per barrel would make the shale oil and gas production loss, and they would stop it, and then the U.S. would lose its role as a strategic role as a supplier. That's the first. The second, of course, is keeping the Arab states convinced that they need to pay for arms shipments and security to the Persian Gulf, to the United States for their security against Iranian alleged threat, even in the post-coronavirus world, where many economies have been hurt and have shrunk, and surely and essentially they would pay less and less for military purposes. He is trying to keep them convinced that they need to continue to pay to the United States for these military objectives. And third, as a diversion to derail the public opinion from his mishandled coronavirus situation at home to something crisis, several days of crisis or weeks of crisis abroad. That's been a worn-out scenario that has been always underway by other U.S. presidents as well. But all these, I believe, work on this premise that Iran would not take action, and that's been wrong, as we've seen twice, at least in the last 1 year. And this could eventually end up in war. This could, any kind of misfire could go, end up in war. But there is only one chance that I see for the start of planned military conflict by the United States. The U.S. president thinks about economy as his only achievement for winning the re-election. Now, if the coronavirus situation ruins his chances for as an economic achievement, he would see himself empty-handed, and he understands that his chances for re-election would stand at zero. Then he might, in somewhere around end of summer, he would start some kind of very limited military action, probably, in order to, start new war. That's what many American presidents have done, that he would become a president of war. But war is something that he is escaping. Let's remember, he promised his campaign that he would not, initiate war. If he starts war, he would lose his voters base. If he escapes, if wars breaks out, like what happened in Ain al-Assad, Iran devastated Ain al-Assad, and he took no action, he would be called a coward commander-in-chief by the Democrats. Again, he would lose war. So he doesn't want war. He knows that any kind of war with Iran or anyone else would end up in his loss, and he would lose the race, unless he stands very much discouraged from winning the election already because of the coronavirus and the economy that has been ruined. And if he feels very much discouraged...
Okay, Mr. Khoshcheshm, you're of that President Donald Trump doesn't want war with Iran, but it wants to keep engaging Iran just to get the voter base intact, because there is upcoming presidential election around the corner in November. And you also alluded to a very important fact that it just wants to keep its allies keep paying it for whatever the ambition it wants to. I would take this point to you, Mr. Szamuely. Do you agree with this point, that these are all the election tactics which are being adopted at this point in time by President Donald Trump?
I think in part they are, but the hostility toward Iran is of much longer standing. As I said, he was already extremely hostile to Iran during the 2016 campaign, and that was in contradiction to his non-interventionist platform. So the one area in which he wanted to increase intervention was in the area that involved Iran. There's also now and this is something that has been reported in the New York Times this week, the plan on the part of the Trump administration to undertake some kind of a deft maneuver of returning to the JCPOA in order to pressure the UN Security Council to reimpose the full panoply of sanctions against Iran. This is something being planned for in October, and so this may well come at the time when there's already be some sort of a military confrontation between the United States and Iran. The U.S. policy is always to secure easy victories. It's never to engage in any long, protracted conflict. Whenever
Mr.
the U.S.
Szamuely,
does
you're of
that,
the view that it's been always an effort on the part of the U.S. to just gain something out of a very short-term sort of conflicts, and it doesn't want to go and engage itself into the protracted war that lasts for a longer time. Thank you for being with us. Mr. Jawad Tehami, Middle East expert, joined us from Budapest, and Mr. Muotafa, Khoshcheshm analyst, who joined us from Tehran. Thank you very much for your time at Newswire. With this, we come to the end of the second segment. In the third, we will discuss the efficacy of blood plasma transfusion in treating the COVID-19 patients. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Newswire. As of today, the global COVID-19 death toll has risen to over 217,000, with more than 3.1 million infection cases. As there is no proven remedy for treating the disease, the development of an effective vaccine doesn't seem happening in the near future as well. However, a technique known as the blood plasma transfusion has been talked about widely and is being used in certain countries as well. In a recent development, doctors in Russia have found some positive results by using this particular technique. How encouraging is this finding? And can this be used widely till an effective vaccine is developed? To talk about this, we are joined by Dr. Tang, the Division Chief of the Pathology Sciences at Sidra Medicine, joining us from Doha. Dr. Tang, thank you very much for your time at Newswire. In a previous episode, we had already discussed the possibility of the speed of development of an effective vaccine for COVID-19. But could you tell us a little bit more where this particular progress has reached by this point in time?
In terms of vaccines, there's probably over 70 different vaccine candidates being worked on all around the world right now. A few of them have gone to clinical trials. So I think in the next year, maybe year and a half, we should see some positive developments in terms of vaccines. And we hope that we will have a vaccine for COVID-19 by that time.
So as you have just discussed in the last episode as well, that from 12 to 18 months are required, and by the end of the next year, it might be possible that we can get an effective vaccine against COVID-19. Over there in Russia, doctors have found positive results with the blood plasma transfusion therapy. How do you think this is encouraging development, and can this therapy be used until we are not able to get an effective vaccine until the end of the next year?
Well, the use of convalescent plasma, or plasma that's collected from people that have recovered from an illness to treat people who have severe illness from that, has been used for over 100 years. So we know that it works. So the questions that remain unanswered are which people does it work in and which people does it not work in? When should we use the plasma, and when should we not use the plasma? So I think those are the questions that remain unanswered. And unfortunately, many countries in the world are using this therapy right now, but not doing it in randomized controlled trials where we can really assess the true efficacy of the therapy. So there are only a few trials right now going on to actually be able to prove whether it's effective and in which situations it's most effective. Right now, it's being used sort of in a bit of a haphazard way all around the world.
Because the situation is very much haphazard, because the pandemic has gripped the entire world, and people are running against time in order to save as many people as they can. So this particular technique, when we talk about the endorsement by WHO, does the global health body endorse this particular technique?
Well, they're not at the point where they're endorsing this technique, but definitely it shows promise. I think what needs to be answered is when do we give this therapy and to whom we give this therapy, because there isn't an unlimited supply of convalescent plasma available. We have to collect it from donors, and those donors have to be free of other infectious diseases. And we have to test this product very carefully before we give it to people, because we're transferring blood from one person to another person, and there are risks associated with that.
So what kind of complications be there? As you've just said, there could be risks associated with this one as well.
So definitely there are many different kinds of risks. So they include risks like injuries to the lung. They could include risks like overloading someone's body with too much fluid. There can be allergic type responses in people that receive plasma from another person. And always there's a risk that there are some infectious agents still in the blood that we missed through our screening, and that could be transmitted to the recipient of the plasma. So those are a very low percentage risk, but they're definitely not 0%.
But Dr. Tang, if this is not efficient in terms of its percentage, and you are of the view there are certain risks also involved, and the effective vaccine doesn't happen to be in sight for the next 1.5 years as well. So by that time, what exactly should be done? Should there be some research that should be done to get some sort of an effective drug or medicine against this disease?
There's many different trials ongoing right now to try to repurpose existing drugs and drug combinations to see if they might be effective against COVID-19, as well as the use of convalescent plasma. So I think we're all waiting for many of these trials to have some results. Unfortunately, what's happening around the world is that people are very desperate, and they're using a lot of these drugs prior to the results becoming available from all of these trials. So it makes it very hard to interpret whether one drug is working or another one isn't, because all of these things are being combined and used together in the same patients. So we have to wait for the trials that are properly designed to come forward with all of their results before we can really conclude what's effective and what's not effective, or how effective something is, because many of these things might be effective, but they may only be marginally effective.
Dr. Tang, as living in the age of innovation, where the science and technology has done wonders for humanity, and you just said that people are desperate to have the cure of this particular disease. We see that 217,000 people have died so far within a span of 5 months. It's within a span of 4 months, in fact. And there are over 3.1 million infections. Don't you see the justification in that frustration or that desperation of the common man when they look forward to the scientific community?
I think I totally agree with that. And that's what we try to balance all the time. What's the ethics of withholding a drug that may or may not work for someone that's clinging to life, and this might be the only therapy that might save them, and at the same time we don't know if it'll harm them at the same time. So I think that's a very tough question, and that's being dealt with case by case, as well as in every institution in every country has their own rules in terms of how they approach this issue. It's definitely there's no easy answer to this. But definitely to really prove something, we have to do the trials properly to really get an answer.
You think this problem doesn't have any easy answer? Dr. Patrick Tang, analyst and the Division Chief of Pathology Sciences at Sidra Medicine from Doha, thank you for your time at Newswire. With this, we come to today's end of Newswire. We'll be back with you on Monday with more in-depth analysis on the major happenings from around the globe. Till then, take good care of yourselves.